Welcome to Sorghum Smart Talk, a podcast brought to you through a partnership of National Sorghum Producers and the Sorghum Checkoff. I'm John Duff, NSP Strategic Business Director, coming to you from Lubbock, Texas. Today I'm joined by Dan Atkisson. Dan is incoming chairman of National Sorghum Producers, and he is from Northwest Kansas. Dan, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on today, John.
So tell us a little bit about your farm specifically. Where I guess start with where it's at. For those of us that are not in Kansas and maybe not even on the high plains, give us a little bit of a rundown of where geographically you're located in the state.
Right. So we farm here in Rooks and Graham counties. Make my home in Stockton, Kansas. We'd be in the northwest part of the state. We're about 30 minutes from Nebraska and about 2 hours from Colorado.
Okay, so what crops do you grow? Sorghum, obviously, but you've got wheat and you've got a couple other crops as well. Tell us about those.
Sure. Primary rotation is a wheat, sorghum, and fallow rotation. We do have a cow-calf herd as well, so we grow quite a bit of variety of forages, a lot of forage sorghums and millets, and some alfalfa as well.
So is that all cow-calf, or do you switch that up a little bit depending on cattle market conditions? You're on any stockers or anything?
Yeah, we've got the primary, the core cow herd. We've got fall and spring cows, and also have some registered cows as well. So we'll background our own calves if the market conditions are right, and grass some calves through the summer as well.
Okay, is that you said background yourself? Are y'all actually doing it on your own yard, or is that in a commercial yard? Or?
No. Primarily, we're just backgrounding on grass. So
Okay.
if we have a wet year, we can background on grass, and if it's dry, we'll go ahead and move those calves to town.
Got it. Well, so forages are a really important part of your operation. A lot of farmers listening, specifically to a podcast that kind of started out as a grain marketing podcast, are primarily grain growers, but forages are just as big a part of your operation as grain is in some respects. Is that all sorghum forages, or is there anything else?
Like I said before, it's a vast variety of things, whatever will grow and whatever will fit that time of year. There's a big enough cow-calf population in this part of the state that there's maybe as many acres of forage sorghum planted as there are of grain sorghum. So between straight forage sorghum sedans, and then moving into the millets would make up a bulk of that. Just anything that'll grow and that'll fit our rotation and our timing, the time of year will grow.
Absolutely. So you've got family involved in the operation. You've got the first generation is still involved in the operation, and the next generation's playing in the dirt. So tell us about a family and what that means to your farm and your neighbors' farms, and kind of the culture in your area and how family has driven that.
Yeah, it's very much a family-oriented operation and has been for years. So the farm originally was started when would be my great grandfather homesteaded a quarter that's not very far from where the homestead is now.
What year was that?
1878, I believe. So it's been well over 100 years ago. Ancestors homesteaded, lost that in the Depression, also had another farm nearby that they moved to. We've been on that place since 1937, I believe. So we've been in the area for quite a while. The farm was actually my dad's great aunt and uncle. They didn't have any children, and so my dad went and worked for them during the summers. And then when he got out of college, he came back full-time to the operation. And then in 2009, when I graduated college, I came straight back home from K-State.
So what I am always fascinated by the high plains and the rolling plains as well, just to the east, and stories from the Dust Bowl. You mentioned the 30s and actually losing the farm a couple of times. So there has to be some stories coming through that and actually surviving as a family on the farm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the best stories behind that is when the older generation was losing the original farm. Who I call my grandfather, who'd be my great uncle, had moved off of the farm and had bought his own quarter of land, and times were tough, and he was getting ready to lose that back to the bank, and he actually traded some oil prospectors his quarter that was mortgaged up for a free and clear quarter, and that's still where the homestead is today.
Oh wow, that is a pretty neat story. That's neat history. There's so much history on this land, and it's amazing how long your country has been in production. It's hard to think that we've been out here farming in this arid area now for 150 years. So switching gears a little bit, and jumping backwards to when you were a little younger, you were an FFA, and I know that drove quite a few things for you younger, and then ultimately it's led to some great opportunities for you professionally. And tell us about that, and how that went, and kind of what you did in FFA.
Yeah, and I'd back up even a step from there. Got involved with 4-H. 7 years old, went all the way through 4-H, and until I got involved in FFA in high school, and got to do just a lot of things through the FFA program. Really enjoyed that. Did everything from livestock judging to all the different kind of judging events. Got into public speaking as well. Became a district FFA officer, and then turned around and ran for a state FFA office, and was elected the Kansas FFA president in 2004.
So what year did you graduate? So
yeah, 2004, the year I graduated high school.
Okay, and then you graduated from K-State
in 2009.
And what was your degree?
So my degree is in ag tech management, and I've got a minor in animal science.
Okay, so you were at Kansas State about 4 years. What all did you do at K-State?
About 5 years, but who's counting? Yeah.
Did you? So did you? Other than FFA, what else were you involved in at K-State that kind of shaped what you're doing now?
Yeah, and coming out of FFA and especially was the state president my freshman year of college, so got really involved in the College of Agriculture. Was part of their ag ambassadors program. Moved on and was involved with student legislature as well. So I was a senator for the Senate representative for the College of Agriculture there at K-State as well. Served on one of the student body president's cabinets 1 year. So stayed involved on campus.
And your involvement and your striving to grow professionally has really not ended since you left school, and that led you to be a member of Leadership Sorghum Class 2 that the Sorghum Checkoff sponsors. Tell us about that experience and how that helped you in your growth in the sorghum industry and ultimately led you to where you're at with NSP today.
Yeah, it's just a phenomenal program, and I'm so glad that decided to apply for that program and get selected for it. Actually went on the NSP board at the same time that was selected for the sorghum leadership program. So it's almost like on the job training. I got to see all the aspects of the sorghum industry right at the same time. Was able to engage with the NSP board. So I got to see a lot of things in too quick year and a half really. So. But got a lot deeper background of the sorghum industry, and I'm really glad that I took that opportunity.
So remind me, time gets away from me. You came onto the NSP board 2013, is that correct? 13 or 14?
Yeah, I think 2014. So this would be my fourth year on the board.
So I guess Seems like you were on a couple of years there, maybe nearly a full year that you did have overlap there with the leadership program. What are some of the things you did with the leadership program specifically? What were some of the places you went and some of those things that stick out in your head that were key for you in helping shape your view of the sorghum industry?
I think the biggest thing in my mind is first time I'd been south of Amarillo, Texas. So got to go to Lubbock and figure out, just what, the West Texas cropping conditions are, and had never seen cotton in the field before. So got to see the cotton and grain rotation that's pretty prevalent down there. And then got to go see the sorghum seed industry. And that's something that I'd never been around, is sorghum seed production. So I think that first trip to West Texas was pretty eye-opening for me, and really helped me gain some perspective on the industry as a whole, outside of just the high plains of western Kansas. which is, very traditional sorghum growing area.
Absolutely. There was also a trip to DC in there in leadership sorghum. Since the checkoff program, of course, there wasn't any direct lobbying activity associated with the class, but it still gave you good exposure to policy making and educating those in the industry, or those up there about the industry, rather. You have become somewhat of a rock star in DC. Now, you testified a couple of times, and you just do a great job at it. Put in a shameless plug for NSP now with your NSP hat fully on. What was NSP do for you and your operation, and what messages have you taken to DC in that respect when you've been a couple of times?
Yeah, and I think that's what I can tell fellow growers is, the tagline of "We're in DC, so you don't have to be," and that's over the last 2 years I've been in DC a lot, so that other people didn't have to be. So, especially during a farm bill cycle, got to go to DC and testify, like you said. But I think that wholeheartedly NSP is the voice of the sorghum industry and is advocating for sorghum growers. A lot of times as producers, we can be have our nose to the grindstone, out here working and trying to raise a crop, whereas we're not necessarily paying attention to all the policy things that affect us on a day-to-day basis. So being a part of an organization like NSP has really opened my eyes to how much farm policy affects my bottom line, and how much we need to pay attention to that. So that's the thing that I always tell other growers that either are members and aren't seeing the value of it, or people that haven't become members yet, is that once you get an idea of how much policy affects your bottom line, you'll want to become more engaged.
Absolutely. I'd completely echo that and appreciate those comments. I think that there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and it is an ugly, messy process. As you know, you've been extremely involved in some of these debates over the last couple of years on the board, and I know you'll continue to be very involved in them as chairman. What are some of those issues specifically that you have worked on in the last couple of years that you mentioned being in DC a lot, so others didn't have to be over the last couple? What are some of those key issues that you've worked on that you felt like there was a lot of positive change that was able to happen?
Well, I guess just here this summer we got to go to Washington D.C. and I'll put in a shameless plug for John Duff of how much work and how much dedication he had to getting a sorghum oil pathway done. I thought that was one of the neatest things that we could do, was actually as producers walk the halls of EPA and sit down with the administrator and speak with him, and then also see a very positive change for sorghum going into renewable fuels. So, that was something that I didn't have to work on a lot, but I know you, John, you put a ton of work into that. And that's something that sorghum growers should be very thankful for.
Well, so thanks for that, Dan. We really appreciate it. And for those of you not familiar, the sorghum oil pathway is effectively an approval to sell sorghum oil extracted at ethanol plants into the biodiesel supply chain. And there's a significant amount of work that has to go on with EPA to get that approval. It went on way too long. And by the time we finally got it done, everybody was so ready to be done that we got a press release and we got a national televised conference. The national televised part only lasted for about 30 seconds until they realized it really wasn't worth their time to cover, but it was on for a second, but ended up being a very significant deal for the ethanol industry, given a third of our crop is being used to produce ethanol currently. Talk a little bit about that, Dan, on ethanol specifically. You are close to an ethanol plant at Russell, Kansas. So not only from the grain demand side, but also the distiller's grain side and what it does to the feed market and the positive aspects that ethanol brings to the sorghum industry.
Yeah, absolutely. In the past, when sorghum was the cheaper feedstock for not only Russell, but also for Phillipsburg, which is even closer to me. They ran grain sorghum. And so then the last several years, because of, exports and things like that, they've mainly run corn. So, but once again, when they don't have a viable use for their sorghum oil when they just have to sell it into the feed market. That's just another strike against using grain sorghum as a feedstock for their plants. So I think now, especially where we're at a little bit of a disadvantage on basis wise, I think those plants are going to look very hard at going back to sorghum.
Ethanol is obviously important to the sorghum industry, but China over the last few years has become a very important piece of the industry as well. Talk a little bit about China and specifically what you were involved in with the NSP board in the China trade adjudication situation. It was pretty interesting. Tell us your take on that.
Well, that was a very eye-opening experience for a small group like ourselves to take on, what is the Chinese government and their Ministry of Commerce. It was eye-opening to me of exactly what all goes into that process and what kind of legwork that it takes to make a case like that work. So we had boots on the ground. As soon as the anti-dumping case and countervailing duty case came available. Just so happened we had boots on the ground, literal boots on the ground in DC very quickly. Got to town, got to looking for legal representation and really hit the ground running. And I'm really proud of our industry and proud of our board of directors and especially our staff for how that situation was handled and in making that large case seemed like it was handled very, very swiftly and easily. Now, I'm sure you've got a difference of opinion there with all the man hours that you and the rest of the staff put in. But from the sorghum growers' perspective, from the producer's perspective, it seemed like it went flawlessly.
So, shifting gears significantly there, talk a little bit about harvest and what the crop looks like that's coming in. You had an amazingly wet summer and have a great crop going. So what is that looking like right now? And what are your prospects for the next wheat crop?
As you said, we've just had a very unseasonably wet summer. Where our farm sits is usually about a 22-inch annual rainfall. And we've had significantly more than that. We've had spring crops out that have just not looked back all summer long. So usually we've got at least some dry, drouthier periods during the summer, and we just never had that. So, the sorghum that's in the ground right now was planted the first part of June and has never stressed a bit. So looking towards fall harvest, I'd love to give you a really good estimate of what that crop could be. I want to get a combine in the field and find out. So having never had a crop quite this good, it's kind of hard to give you a really good estimate. But we do know that if we'd have known how much moisture we'd have handled our crop quite a bit differently. So would have been more fertility out, would have pushed those top end yields a little bit higher. Moving towards fall harvest, I think it's going to be a logistical problem just for the amount of bushels that we have out there, but that's a good problem to have.
So give us a little bit of context here on what a normal year looks like for you. So across the farm average, what is that usually on sorghum? 60, 70, 80 bushels?
Yeah, I think 80 bushels is a pretty fair average, just throughout the last 10 years. As you know, in a dry land area that only receives about 20 inches of rainfall, it's sometimes feast or famine. We can have 0 bushel sorghum because everything gets drought out. Sometimes we'll get push above 100. So we have the soils to raise those good yields. It just depends on Mother Nature and how much rain falls out of the sky.
Now, are you mentioned good soil? Is your land? I know it rolls quite a bit in your area, but you specifically, how flat are you, and how much do you roll?
Pretty much everything we have is terraced. Just from the old days of where we used a lot of tillage, almost everything had to be terraced. We've got fields with an extreme amount of grade that we farm all the way to fairly flat land. So it seems like in our area we run cows in the rough spots and we farm the flat spots. So, but that doesn't keep the tractor from tilting over a little bit in some of those draws.
So rapid fire Q&A. One word answers, couple of minute answers, really quickly. Favorite cut of beef?
I like a ribeye.
Me too. Main equipment color.
Red.
Oldest piece of equipment you actually use.
Oh my. I was pulling around a disc the other day that I know is 40 years old.
Oh, good grief. That was a little older than I expected. What about newest
It's
piece?
still in really good shape though.
What about
What's
newest
that?
piece? What about newest piece? Like, you buy anything this year?
No, no. Most of our equipment's a little older, so
So we
about
go
a
from
2004 or five is probably about our newest.
so you go from the late 70s to 2004 or 5 there on equipment.
Yeah, that's about right.
Okay. Favorite tractor jam or podcast or talk radio show or audio book or
Oh wow.
regular book.
Listen to a lot of podcasts. Listen to quite a bit of the agri talk stuff. I really like Jim Wiesmeyer's podcast that comes out on Fridays.
Favorite social media platform for engaging others in ag, not looking at high school gossip.
Twitter.
Favorite sport.
Tough one. Baseball.
Number of pocket squares you own.
Too many to count. Probably five or six, seven.
For our listeners that have never met the dapper Dan Atkisson, Dan always sports the pocket squares and wears them very well. He has given me the courage to begin wearing them, and I don't pull them off like you do, Dan, but I do probably have 6 of them now, 4 of which I've probably never worn.
I'm
But,
the same way.
but
Stick with two.
you always look sharp in DC, and like I said, they love you up there, and we love having you up there because you do a great job in bringing the message in a great way. Let's wrap up by talking about the next 5 to 10 years. What do you think ag looks like in the next 5, the next 10? Where are we headed? Are we headed for bigger farms, smaller farms, more diversified farms, monoculture? Where is technology going? Just kind of be futuristic for a few minutes and just lay it out.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a doomsday prophet, but I do think that things continue to kind of go the same way that they're going now, especially in our area where we haven't had massive consolidations in the past. I think that you just the big farms continue to get bigger. Um, I think that at a certain point in the next 10 years, we've kind of reached critical mass when it comes to equipment sizes. You can only get so big of a piece of equipment through the rolling hills of western Kansas. So I think we could continue to see some more consolidation. I think we might see smaller to mid-sized farms are going to go, like you said, through some more diversification of, if you can't compete on a size and a scale, you've got to do something a little bit different. So I think sorghum does fit pretty well into both of those scenarios. Can be raised across broad acreages with maybe less management than some other crops, but also from a niche standpoint, from a diversification standpoint, there's many different uses that you can use for sorghum, and I think that those farmers that want to diversify into different markets and different marketing techniques, I think that can be sorghum can be useful as well.
So where are we headed with technology? I know that when I was growing up, I sat on the tractor, and I might sit on the tractor for 14 hours a day. And if I was on the farm now, I might still be on the tractor 14 hours a day, but I wouldn't be driving. GPS wouldn't be driving. And some of the advances that we have seen seem small, but they've been huge. You look at the smartphone guidance, variable rate technology. Where are we headed on technology? Are you one that believes that 5 to 10 years from now we're going to be sitting in an office behind a computer watching as machines are driving things and taking readings off satellites to make crop projections and marketing decisions? How do you think the next few years is going to go from a technology perspective?
It's a question that I've thought about a lot myself, just listening to several different types of media, especially some podcasts I've listened to recently that, a lot of people want to say that in 10 years, we're going to have, driverless tractors and you'll be sitting at home on your computer and monitoring things. And I just don't think that's going to happen. I think in some places it will happen, but for the most part, I don't see that an autonomous tractor on my farm is going to see the big washout and not end up in a big pile. So I still think you're going to have an operator in the field um, maybe operating several different pieces of machinery. Have one, large tractor that's being operated by a human, and then have several other tractors in that same field, but you still got somebody present in the field. And I quite honestly, as little as I like driving a tractor to begin with, that sounds great. But I think when you take the operator out of the situation, you become less of a farmer and less of an agriculturalist, and more of a computer technician. And that's not exactly my wheelhouse either.
Okay, wrap us up. Why is sorghum the smart choice for your farm in Northwest Kansas?
Sorghum's a smart choice from our farm from a yield stability standpoint. Said earlier that Mother Nature and how much water falls out of the sky is the biggest yield limiting factor for us. Year in and year out, sorghum is the dependable, highest yielding crop that we found we can raise on our farm. So I think my bottom line depends a lot on grain sorghum, and we'll continue to raise a lot of acres of it from here on out.
Thanks for joining us, Dan.
Thanks, John.
And thank you for joining us on Sorghum Smart Talk. Join us again next week as we continue our series on marketing. In the meantime, check us out on sorghumcheckoff.com, sorghumgrowers.com. We're also on iTunes and other stuff that we'll record later. Thanks for joining us.